Come and join Paul in cyberspace. You're welcome on Craic with Mac.
Paul McCann's podcast series, Craic with Mac. You'll have a cracker of a time.
Welcome to Craic with Mac. This is Paul McCann. Today on the podcast we're talking to Steve Cheers about his life and his music. It's great to have you here on the first Craic with Mac podcast.
The very first Craic with Mac.
The inaugural podcast, and you're it today, Steve.
Well, I feel very privileged, Paul.
Like myself, Steve. Look, it's been said your life has been a journey with many twists and turns. How did you end up here in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales?
Well, really that came from just sort of feeling a little bit out of place where we were living. With my now wife, we were in Abbotsford, Five Dock area, and over the years that we were there, it just got busier and busier, and they had a big block of land that Nestle used to own, and they put about 2,000 homes on it down at Abbotsford Point, and all of a sudden I found myself lining up to get down the road from Five Dock to Abbotsford, and so we got married, and we intended to stay there for a little while, but we had a little house that we'd bought here because my wife had family here just as an investment. But then after we got married, we thought, we don't really want to bring up kids in this sort of congested environment, and so we just really within a week or two just packed up and came here because we had the little house that we'd bought for about $100,000. Which was about all we could afford at the time, and that was in 97 or 98, and best decision we ever made.
Really. Great move, Steve. Let's go back a wee bit into your early years with your parents and grandparents. Were they musicians or singers?
Oh, long line on my father's side. My father's siblings were entertainers. There was one brother who was a band leader, a pianist. Was the regular person at Skelsey's out at near Fairfield in Sydney. And my auntie, my father's sister, was a television and theatre performer, Beryl Cheers, and she was quite prominent in the 60s and the 70s until she died in 1980 or 81. So good tradition there. And then my mother was actually a nightclub singer, and that's how she met my father, by turning up at Skelsey's and singing regularly in my uncle's band, and then eventually met his brother, who became my father.
Wonderful background there, Stephen. Very colourful growing up there. And as a young lad, what sort of music were you listening to back then? Well,
one of my sisters was a piano teacher, conservatorium trained, so I listened to her teaching her students in the house all the time when we were growing up, and that was mainly classical music. And she and the rest of my family were very involved in the local Catholic Church, and she was and still is, now she's 70, but she still is the music coordinator for the church in Marylands. And I used to go up and sing sing at school, and I was the kid that was always out the front, leading the singing from a very early age. And then, look, I was very young. I have a memory of 7 or 8 starting to write little tunes and songs as a youngster, and then I think probably around about age 10 I discovered pop music and started listening to the top 40 every week, and so that was 1974, 75. So in those days it was very melodic.
John, and we had
very melodic music, and in those days too, country music was mainstream, and so there was a lot of country music on the charts in the early 70s. People like Olivia Newton-John even, or the Bellamy Brothers, or the Eagles, who you now consider a country band, maybe not then. So listening to lots of pop things, and I was a Countdown child, and I listened to watch Countdown every week, so whatever.
Donny Sutherland.
Yeah, Donny Sutherland on Saturday mornings. Yeah. So I was very much keeping up with the trend, and really, so whatever was on the charts I was into.
So with your bands, what was your first band? Do you remember the name of the first band?
I can't. It was in year 12. When I was in year 12, a few of us formed a band and we played at a few parties. But I can't actually remember what we called it. That's a good question. I'll have to ask one of the others because I'm still in touch with them, so they might remember. But we used to play, whatever the guitarist knew, really. We would go along with. There was some Eagles in there, and there was some Neil Diamond in there, I remember, and then there was a band called Hush that were popular in Australia, and Ted Mulry Gang. I think we played Jump in My Car and things like that.
Great stuff.
Just a couple of AC/DC songs, early stuff. But I don't know what the name of the band was.
It'll probably come to you later. Look, growing up with that sort of music, you can't go wrong. But what I have noticed looking at some of your songs and your video clips, Steve, is that you've got a great sense of community in everything you do. That local people, for instance, you use in the music videos, local camera crews and producers like Ozzy.
It's good to use locals and friends. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice quality. And people like Ozzy and Michael, who I worked on most of those videos with, they're very good at what they do, and they looked after me as well, price-wise, because there's no money in it these days. But absolutely, it's good to use local people and people that you know. And a couple of songs we just gathered. I put out a message on Facebook, come down to the pub, we're going to film a video, and down they all come, just to get their face on the camera.
With the last band, Cowpoke, you did a gig in 2008 at some cow muster. That was the last time you were with the band?
In terms of a band where there were several songwriters and we're all contributing and in charge of the band, since 2010 I've just done my own thing, which is easier if you're not having to consult with people all the time, well, apart from my wife, of course, but harder in a sense that you're on your own and there's not that sort of group effort behind it. So I just sort of have paid musicians to play whenever I've played. Whereas with the band, when you're travelling around, everyone's sharing the expenses and the decision making. There's something special about that, but it is hard to gel ideas.
With the video you did for Big Red Ute, the late and great Jeff Harvey was part of that production. I think the message there was good, with the song and the way it was presented. It was a country lifestyle. Well, none of us really, despite what I said about listening to music in the 70s and there being lots of country. When we formed Cowpoke in 2004, it was with teachers from our music school, and we all sort of had young children and were looking for something to do, in a sense, apart from changing nappies. And so, I said, well, why don't we put a little band together and play and write some songs, because I knew there was some good talent amongst them. And they said, what sort of band will we do? Because, one liked Kiss and one liked progressive rock from the early 70s, and I liked pop. One liked the drummer liked jazz, and I said, well, let's try country. But none of us really had any great background in country music, so we had to go on a steep learning curve, and that was a bit of a journey. It didn't come easily necessarily. The first album, we tried to write what we thought was country music. The second one, I think we got more of a grip on it, and songs like Big Red Ute, which you referred to, and Country Kind of Guy, they were both written by Tim, who unfortunately lost a month or two back. But he was the one of us that grew up in the country and had the best understanding of the themes, not so much writing the music, but he was a great songwriter and very melodic and very clever. But Big Red Ute, yes, he which was our biggest hit on the country music charts. Tim wrote that, and I thought it was a crackingly good song, and we filmed it at what was the local Ford dealership here in Bowral. They've since moved on to the medical centres there now, but that was great, and Jeff agreed to come along and have a bit of fun with us. It's a good memory. Very nice.
That day.
Look at over the years too, growing up in Australia, who would you say would have supported and encouraged what you were doing?
Well, all my sisters are all musical in their own way, and our parents were pretty much encouraging of whatever we wanted to do, musical or otherwise. They weren't overly well off, so they didn't have money to sort of support it in that way, but basically whatever we wanted to do, they were supportive of that. And although I was musical, I didn't really start, releasing songs until mid-20s, actually releasing music to the public.
So what was the first song you wrote, Steve?
Oh, well, that would have been when I was about 7. And then I wrote a whole lot of songs when I was about 15 through to about 17 that came out eventually on an album years later called Peculiar Days. That band was called Crazy Life. And that one's up on iTunes. And that was, very much teenage themes of love and relationships and loss and things like that, and not country, that stuff, very very much just pop. We had a band in the early mid-90s that did the Sydney scene for 2 or 3 years and did fairly well, but then as these things do, bands come and go.
I was going to say, writing songs about people and places has been a great thing with your songs, and very rewarding in many ways. What would be some of the most rewarding memories you have with some of the songs you've done?
Well, the sense of story is a very country themed thing where you find you meet a person or you observe an event and then you write about that in the first or the third person. In terms of what's memorable for me, I would say something like Roger That, which was a cowpoke song which I redid for one of my albums, which probably was one of the best charting songs that I've had. Or just that was a fictitious story, but writing about a henpecked husband and the play on words as well. That's a very country thing.
We might actually listen to one of the songs from The Speed of Love, the title track. We'll just have a listen to that now in the programme. For your pleasure, on the podcast, we've got Steve Cheers next up, and the title track from The Speed of Love, which was released in 2011.
Walked in with a life full of luggage, could see it trailing far behind. I had to ask, it was just what she wanted, you could see it in her eyes. And though the story hardly threw me, the damage was the big surprise. 2 kids, her long-time lover, vanished in a puff of lies. She'd gone up and down and back through the middle, trying to figure out this fascinating riddle. Scientists as well meddle and they fiddle, look into the skies above, trying to find the speed of love. We met again a full year later, the desolation at an end. She'd met a boy, was oh so happy, marrying a new best friend. A month later it was all but over, she knew it in the second week. Things changed with a ring on her finger, seems he had a violent streak. She'd gone up and down and back through the middle, trying to figure out this fascinating riddle. Scientists as well meddle and they fiddle, look into the skies above, trying to find the speed of love. round and round, oh, up and down and back through the middle, trying to figure out this fascinating riddle. Scientists as well meddle and they fiddle, look into the skies above, trying to find the speed of love. Look into the skies above, trying to calculate the speed of love.
And we're back again with Steve Cheers on the Craic with Mac podcast. Steve, as we've been talking about your music, that album, Speed of Love, had some brilliant songs on the album. I'd like to just mention a couple of those songs in your take on that. Rise was written by The Chosen Few and performed by Darrell Braithwaite, that was in Sherbet from the 70s.
That's right, yes.
And the song Rise has a great story to it, a very powerful story to it.
Yes, it's a defeating the odds, rising from the ashes type song, and that's one that I've played in every band or as a solo artist for as long as I've been doing it. So that song came out in about 1989.
Part of you must connect with that song.
Yeah, well, I'm a Western Suburbs boy. And as a teenager, when we started going out to pubs and things like that, it was a pretty rough and ready place, Parramatta. Parramatta through to Blacktown, basically, is where we'd hang out on Friday and Saturday nights, and it was very much the Wild West in those days.
It was a lot of hard times out in those western suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that my upbringing was terribly struggle street. My family didn't have much, but it was it was a complete family unit. There was no marital breakdown, and we always had food on the table, and we always dressed well for school. So it wasn't as if we really struggled. But life in the western suburbs in the 70s, overall was a bit of a struggle. It was a very it was young families and the new frontier, as you like, and not all that multicultural, fairly white, but fairly tough. You wouldn't go out on a Saturday night on your own. You'd take a group of mates just in case you ran into trouble, which, if you looked the wrong way, you might find. So,
yeah. I actually grew up around, where Fairfield, that was where I used to live. And
yes, well, a similar thing there, yes, in that area.
There was a lot of gangs, there was a lot of hard people around the streets then.
That triangle.
And you had to rise above that, didn't you, and become the person that you were meant to be.
Well, that's right. I think that's right. And there was that triangle sort of from Parramatta out to Liverpool and then across to Blacktown. And that was it was very much the new family area, and it was a tough area. And I played a lot of football in my teens, and often I'd go out with the football team, and that was a fairly secure way to do it.
Now, the other song that really touched me, Steve, was "Raining in My Heart." Which, am I right in saying it was about the relationship between a father and daughter?
Yeah, that song was written when our first child was born, and it started off. I was trying to write a song about the drought that we were experiencing, around 2005 to 2007. Seems to go in cycles, doesn't it? So that period was very, very dry in Australia, and for our second album I thought, well, we need a song about water and drought.
Drought breaking.
And so I started writing about it, but I found that I couldn't, because even just here in the Southern Highlands, which is not quite the same as a remote country town in any sense, I just couldn't relate because I hadn't lived through, didn't have that lived experience of drought and, you know, being so connected to water. You know, here we just turned the tap on, as bad as it got with restrictions and things. So I had a great amount of trouble coming up with a song, and then I realised that if I just turned it, what I needed to do was to turn the song around to something that I did have experience in, and that was the unlocking of emotions that come with the birth of your first child. I think anyone would say, you know, holding that first child, and you realise that there's a lot more to life than you had realised up until that point. So I just turned it around to an emotional drought, and having the birth of your first child be the breaking of that drought. That, you know, most people would have a great outpouring or experience of emotion upon the birth of their first child, and that was my experience. And once I decided that's what the song was about, it came out in about 10 minutes.
As they do, like the sluice gates open up, and
that's right, the floodgates, so to speak.
The title track, Steve, I'm intrigued with the speed of love. Broken relationships here we're talking about? Yeah,
look, a friend, a female friend that I'm still friends with, but have been for, you know, 15, 20 years, who, lovely girl, who I watched her twice just pick the wrong guy for her, and have it all just fall apart. You know, both times she thought that everything was fine, and then, you know, once the ring went on the finger, these guys turned into something quite different to what they'd presented themselves. It's so inspired by her experience, but also then, you know, for years and years I've worked at the RSL Club running karaoke and trivia on a Sunday night, and I was amazed, unlike the city, that when a couple breaks up in a small town, they can't really avoid each other. So, you know, if they used to come to karaoke every week and they break up, well, they still like to come to karaoke every week, but instead of sitting together, they're sitting at different ends of the room. And I was impressed by the fact that in a small community, when relationships break down, you don't really have any choice but to get over it. Even if you don't, you still have to find a way to live in the presence of the other person, because you can't avoid it. Whereas in Sydney, you break up with someone, you'll never see them again. But in a small town, there's no avoiding them, especially if you've got shared interests. So you've just got to get on with it. So the idea of the speed of love is the speed at which it happens, ends, and then you have to get over it and just move on.
Yeah, I get it now, Steve. You know, as you said before, and I'll quote you, that all good country songs tell a story, which you've just done. And each of these songs that we're talking about all have their own story. In 2017, you released Measure of a Man with some great songs, brilliant songs. And Waving at Trains, when I first saw the video, without seeing you speak about the song on Breakfast at Callaway's, I looked at the video and thought, as you do, you assume that the song was about this old lady sitting, waving at trains and barrel passing her door. And then I heard you talk about the song, how it was inspired with your daughter at Movie World on the train. And she was
and I went, that one. I'd forgotten that.
I said to myself, right. So I got it wrong. This is what the song, and we often do that, Steve. We hear a song and assume what it's all about until you speak to the songwriter.
Well, I like to with my songs now release notes that explain the songs, because I think if there's a story and people understand what that story is, then they connect. They connect far better to the song. And when I do play live, which I haven't for a while, and don't all that often, I do spend quite a lot of time talking about the songs before we actually play them, because I find that enhances people's understanding and their enjoyment.
Being a storyteller, isn't
That's right.
Part of that.
Yeah.
With the other songs on this Measure of a Man, The Glass Half Full, Jeffrey had a pub that he owned in Barrow.
Jeffrey was Jeff Harvey.
Yeah.
And over the time that I knew Jeff, 15, 20 years, he had a local. It changed. He's very well known out at Berrima. He was very well known at the Royal. He spent the last years every afternoon after work at Gibraltar Hotel. And he always had a special place that he sat. And he always had friends around him. And as long as his mood was good, anyone who came up and said g'day, he'd always have a g'day back for them. So the first part of that song is just his little story. Glass half full, being staying positive. And I watched some terrible drunks approach him over the years, and generally he coped with them fairly well.
It's nice how stories never die and memories never die, and you can bring these through with a song like that one. And like there's two more on the album. They're brilliant songs. The whole album has got so many stories. Now is the time to let it go.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. That one, I had half of that song written for years and years and years. Maybe 4 or 5 years, and I tried to work out what it was about, and it took me a long time. And look, it's a fairly simple theme in the end of just finding ways to let go of things that pain that you've experienced. Relationships that have broken down that you think you've let go of, but you haven't. And of course, the saying is that, of course, when you hang on to a situation where someone has let you down, or you feel they've let you down, or hurt you, or taken advantage of you, whilst ever you hold a grudge against them, it's you that's being held back, not them. So. It's a very simple theme. Now's the time to let it go. Any time is. Easy to say, not easy to do, but until you absolutely let go of a pain from the past, it controls you. So, that's what the song's about. And as I say, easy to say, harder to live, but that's okay. Songs are aspirational, aren't they?
Yeah, and there's a great maturity in that song, and embracing that and taking it into your life. It's a wonderful message. The other song here is Best Part of the World, which has got a great video clip shot in different areas.
Very, very fond of that song.
Yeah, it's a great number.
Reasons. It's meant to be it started life as a I Love Australia song, but really it's more about trying to be happy and content with wherever you are. I do see it as, and I did write it as a celebration of Australia. But when we filmed that video, we went out on the harbour and did some shooting. There's some footage actually from New Zealand, just done on the phone, that my wife filmed, because we drove through an inspiring place just coming into Queenstown. And then we went and filmed at a school, at Oakdale Primary School, because the principal had got hold of the album and had taught the kids for Australia Day, or maybe it was the end of a year function or something like that, had taught the song to them because it's a very multicultural school, Oakdale. And I got wind of that, and so I asked when we were making the video, because it was the second or third single off the album, whether we could come and film the kids singing it, and they embraced that. And the video really is very touching. It was a very special day filming the kids singing along to my song, being in such a multicultural school, just seeing them all so happy doing so.
I think for the pleasure of the listeners and on the podcast, let's have a listen to that track now. For your pleasure, people out there on the podcast, Steve Cheers next up with Best Part of the World from the album Measure of a Man. Let's have a listen to it now.
It's in your eyes, can you see it? It's in your ears, can you hear it? It's in your heart, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? It's in your hands, can you hold it? It's in your head, can you know it? It's in your life, can you show it? Can you see it? Can you see it? You were born into the best part of this world. To breathe here, the food we still get to grow here, the sun and rain that we know here. Can you see it? Can you see it? It's how we are pulled together when mates have more than they can bear, the peace and freedom we all share. Can you feel it? Can you feel it? Folks from all around the earth will tell you this for what it's worth, that you were born into the best part of this world. Were born into the best part of this world. You were born into the greatest place ever known. More a gift than earned into the best part of this world. So many flee without much plan, except to reach this wondrous land like you and we were born into the best part of this world. It's in your eyes, can you see it? It's in your ears, can you hear it? It's in your heart, can you feel it? Can you feel it? Can you feel it? It's in your hands, can you hold it? It's in your head, can you know it? It's in your life, can you show it? Can you see it? Can you see it? You were born into the greatest place ever known.
Welcome back to the program and Craic with Mac, speaking today with Steve Cheers, singer, songwriter, businessman, entrepreneur, and many other things. Steve, 2020, what a year that was.
It sure was.
The effect of the COVID pandemic and lockdown has overflowed and spilled into many areas. The entertainment business was hard hit with concerts and tours being cancelled, and the livelihoods of many professional musicians came to a full stop. So what did Steve Cheers do during 2020?
Well, in terms of performing, I haven't really performed since the end of 2018. We did do a reunion gig with Cowpoke at the end of 2019. That was the one exception as far as performing goes, and that was a great night. So, in terms of the effect of COVID on my life as a performer, zero, because I wasn't performing anyway. But what it did do was, what re-emerged was the desire to put Cowpoke back together and do another band album. And we wrote, the three of us who were the writers for the band wrote an album. So we wrote 3 or 4 songs each to record this year. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, Tim, our guitarist, passed away very suddenly just before Christmas, or in November, at only 51. So we're still really in shock from that. the rest of us are in regular contact. So that really thwarted that, obviously. For the moment, we're still working out what to do with the songs. So really, COVID resulted in us going back and writing more because we weren't performing. In terms of my day-to-day life, of course, we run a music school, so it was devastating on the school. In terms of our music shop, it actually helped it because people have been taking up music, which is a great thing. So we actually had a great year sales-wise, but our lessons died. Coming out of that, this year would have been a year of recording and probably touring, but we've now been sort of thrown with Tim's passing, and we'll just have to see really what happens with these songs that we've got. We'd like to record them, whether or not we tour or play, that's another question. Whether we can do that without him, we don't know whether we want to.
Apart from the sense of loss and grief with Tim's passing, there may be a song you could dedicate or tribute to Tim on the album. I'm sure that's probably crossed your mind.
Oh, I'd love to be able to give you one of the 2 or 3 songs that he submitted for the new album, but unfortunately we haven't recorded them. But he had written some great songs. I think if you were to play one of his, I'd like to suggest the song Little Things that he wrote for the album Big Red Ute, which really is, again, just celebrating the joy of a hamburger or a trip down the road. Or
it's in the little moments in life, Steve. The little moments is when things really happen. I'd love to play that on the podcast. And also I'd like to talk about the album, because there's a single, I Get It. Will I Get It be on the album?
I Get It Now is on Measure of a Man. So
I Get It.
That's a
it's a lovely title.
Yeah,
it's a lovely title. Because it was just released 3 months ago in August.
That's right. Well, that was released. I was releasing that and was planning on releasing another song just to get my name back into the country music community leading into the new Cowpoke release. But again, unfortunately, now that's been thrown. So that's why that song was released as a single, but it did quite well. So we'll see. We'll just have to see what this year unfolds.
I think you've got many pokers in the fire, as we would say, and you've got enough activities to keep 10 people going. But you have this wonderful venue in Barrow where you have fun parlour machines and pinball machines, and you also have the PowerPoint music shop in the middle of Barrow, and you also have a music academy school where you've been teaching local people music for 20 years, and you also have a wife and 3 children. And one of your daughters, Hannah, she just released the first album,
She
Dance
has.
to the Blue.
She has, and it's beautiful. It's nothing like what I do. She's a very talented pianist, a very talented writer, and Dance to the Blue has done well for her. She sold a couple of 100 copies, which is not easy to do these days because we've been educated that music isn't something that you buy. She writes music which I think is appropriate for film scores and soundtracks and things like that, so I must try and help her find an avenue for that, because everyone who's listened to the album has been thrilled. It's very much listening, relaxing type music, but she's much more talented than I am at 21 and was at 21. And she's now taking an interest too in starting to perform live as well in bars and pubs and restaurants.
It'd be a wonderful.
So look, I'll probably spend a bit of this year helping her get going with that, because she is a very talented young lady.
You'd be a great asset for her, Steve, with your knowledge in sound engineering.
You think so, Paul? But there's also the do you listen to your parents factor, isn't there?
Well, actually, it brings back the memory of a song Fergal Shorty did. He had a band in Derry called the Undertones, who you two, Bono said, they were inspired by the Undertones. So one of their big hits was "I Bet You Never Listened to Your Father." And it's true. What a great title for a song.
I think certain things have got through, and like she spent her life surrounded by music and musicians, because she was born 3 weeks after we opened the shop. So she's had great exposure to a wide variety of styles of music and styles of musician, and when that unlocks, I think she'll be a very special talent and have a lot to contribute. She plays any instrument she picks up. So for the moment she's focused on piano, but we'll see what happens with Hannah, because she's got a lot of potential.
Because Geraldine, your wife, now she plays the piano and teaches as well, doesn't she?
She does, and she's actually a very talented guitarist as well. She sings. She would say piano's her main instrument, but she has a local band, all ladies, Rapunzel's Party, and she's the guitarist in that band, and plays a lot better than I do. So
what a musical family you have.
Yeah, and the little one, our boy, is quite a solid little bass player, but he's more into the sport. But we've got an 11-year-old who's very much into musical theatre, and she has a particular gift with that, I think. So
and you have theatre in your background as well.
Yeah, well, my auntie Beryl that I mentioned, she was in the original Australian professional cast of Sound of Music, and did many things for 10 or 20 years after that. And I've done quite a bit of theatre over the last 20 or 30 years, but all on an amateur level. I'm very much an amateur. In that regard, I wouldn't try to do it professionally.
There's kind of a parallel between the Steve Cheers family and the Von Trapp family here, isn't there?
Well, look, the reason I got back into the local theatre company a couple of years ago was because Bridget, the little one, got cast as Gretel in The Sound of Music, which went on in 2018. And I got on stage. I thought, if I'm going to take all the rehearsals, I'll get on stage too. So I was Uncle Max. So that was a very special experience that we put on. But as a result, of course, I'm now heavily involved with Highlands Theatre Group, and happily so, because they're a wonderful group of people, and we had a pretty quiet year last year, of course, too, because all theatre stopped. But we're launching our 21 season and hoping to do 4 or 5 shows. So.
I went and seen Music Man at the Hall, French Club Hall, and you were involved with that, and of course Darryl Hope and his family are all involved.
2012, that was a very special show, Music Man, in 2012. Very fond memories of that.
Wonderful production.
It was a wonderful production. It was a good cast, and they were just good people who gelled, and that really comes across on stage. So I haven't directed anything since 2012, so this year we've got, amongst other things, Jesus Christ Superstar going on in September or October, so I'll be directing that. So
we're going back now, what,
very much looking forward to
46 years?
Yeah, 74 I think was the original, maybe 72 to 74 at the Capitol Theatre.
Yep.
In Sydney.
And then you had her as well.
That's right. It was a golden era, wasn't it? So we'll be putting on Jesus Christ Superstar, and then hoping to get the rights following that in a year's time to put on School of Rock, a modern one, which is also, of course, the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber, which people don't often know. School of Rock was the music was written by him. So hopefully we'll get that on in a year's time, and that'll be fun. I'm very much looking forward to that.
These are projects that I'm sure the locals and hopefully even internationally, that it would be great to take something like that abroad, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, School of Rock has been touring professionally for about 6 years, and it was in Australia at the end of 2019, and was still going this time last year, but had to stop for COVID. It was so it didn't get to Adelaide or Perth. I think they cut it short, so they've decided not to bring that back. I think Hamilton's going to be the big hit this year. They're talking about that, so they're not bringing School of Rock back. So they've released it for all the amateur groups a week or two ago, so we're hoping to be one of the first groups to put that on.
There's an awful lot of time and effort goes into a production like that.
Amazing. People don't understand how much it takes to put on a theatrical production with a big cast, and music in particular. Plays are a little simpler, but musicals are very tricky. And look, I really love doing that, and I suppose really that's been my focus for the last couple of years, and I'm looking forward to directing again for the first time, since 2012. And that's all not-for-profit community stuff, and that's great. I find great joy in that.
Steve, with all of the background and knowledge that you've got growing up, writing your first song at 7, going through so many changes in your life with music, adapting to new places, what kind of advice would you like to give to a young person who might be thinking about starting out on the road as a professional singer or songwriter?
Well, my advice, and I've given this many times when asked, to young people who, find themselves writing between the ages of 17 or 21, and they find themselves, with a bit of talent to write. The question is normally, one question is, how do I make it big? And, of course, apart from being good, if we knew the answer to that, everyone would be doing it. So that's a question that's not answerable. But what path should I follow? Should I be writing country music? Should I be writing folk music? Should I be doing heavy metal music? And my answer really is always the same. Do what you love. Because if you do what you love, it stops being work. And if you communicate that love, then others will be caught up in it. But I find these days, it's probably never been any different. People go, well, what's the marketing opportunity? Okay, so even though I love country music, heavy metal's in now, so I'll do heavy metal. Well, that's all very well, but if your heart's not in it, that will show, or it won't show. So my advice is to be authentic. And I mentioned, trying to write a song about a drought when I had no experience of drought. But once I switched that to an emotional drought, well, then out it came. So that would be my advice, just to youngsters or anyone really, doesn't matter how old you are, write with the authenticity, write from your own experience, and then once you can translate that experience to other people's experience or relate to theirs, then you can write authentically about that. That's the starting point, I think, just to do what is most closest to your heart.
I think that's a wonderful motto in life to follow.
It doesn't just apply to music, anything to do with your career, rather than working out how am I going to make money, start with what am I going to do that is going to help me feel fulfilled as a person, and then if you can work a way to live off that, well then, you've achieved everything you need to achieve in life, I think.
Steve, look, it's been brilliant to have you on Craic with Mac podcast, the first podcast, and I really appreciate your time. And we might have a listen to Little Things now.
Yeah, and dedicated, of course, to Tim, who wrote it. I sang it, and when we made it our own as the band. But I think really that sums up a lot of what I've been saying, and also as a nod to our dear friend who we lost out of the blue very suddenly.
Sorry about that, and I'm looking forward to this album when it's going to come out. And please keep in touch, and I'd love to talk to you again down the track somewhere.
Thank you, Paul.
Many things these days getting bigger, like houses and cars. But I just figure it's the little things in life that make the world turn around. People go crazy over money and fame. They keep on coming like moths to the flame. When they get burnt out, they do it all again. But I'm not one of that crowd, 'cause it's the little things that you give to me, but they're too busy getting big to see. The world's gone crazy, but I'm okay, 'cause you show me the little things that matter every day. Junkies must be getting bigger eyes. I go to buy a burger, but I can't believe its size. I can't help thinking that it probably isn't wise. A little is enough for me. They build bigger roads and they sell more cars. Pretty soon there's gonna be people on Mars, and it makes me wonder if shooting for the stars is giving anybody what they need. 'Cause it's the little things that you give to me, but they're too busy getting big to see. The world's gone crazy, but I'm okay, 'cause you show me the little things that matter every day. They tell me big is better, but what do they know? Let them aim high and I'll aim low at the little things that you give to me, but they're too busy getting big to see. The world's gone crazy, but I'm okay, 'cause you show me the little things every single day. Hey, hey. That you give to me, oh, the little things, but they're too busy getting big to see.
Come and join Paul in cyberspace. You're welcome on Crack with Mac.
Paul McCann's podcast series, Crack with Mac. You'll have a cracker of a time.